When Clara Whitmore's wagon exploded in gunfire on the Wyoming plains, she never imagined the deadly stranger who'd save her life would become the man who'd steal her heart. But Luke Granger wasn't just any cowboy. He was a former marshal hunting the gang that murdered his family. Their journey to Silver Creek would test everything they believed about justice, love, and second chances. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The first bullet punched through the canvas cover of Clara Whitmore's wagon with a sound like ripping silk, and in that crystallized moment before chaos consumed everything, she thought about how ridiculous it was that she'd worried about her hair that morning. The second bullet shattered the water barrel strapped to the side, sending a cascade of precious liquid soaking into the thirsty Wyoming dirt. The third, she lost count after the third, because by then she was diving sideways, her carefully packed trunk of schoolbooks exploding open as the wagon lurched violently to one side. "Get down!" The wagon driver, a grizzled man named Hewitt, who'd been hired back in Cheyenne, already had his rifle out, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely aim. "Christ almighty, it's the Barton gang!" Clara hit the floorboards hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Through the gaps in the wooden slats, she could see riders circling like wolves around wounded prey. 5, maybe 6 of them, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their horses kicking up great plumes of dust that hung in the still September air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Your money or your life, pilgrims!" The voice that rang out was young, almost cheerful, as if robbing travelers was nothing more than a pleasant afternoon's entertainment. "Make it quick now, we ain't got all day." Hewitt fired once, twice, the rifle kicks making him stagger backward. One of the riders actually laughed, and returned fire with such casual precision that Hewitt's hat flew off his head. The old man dropped his rifle and raised his hands, his face gone white as sun-bleached bone. "Don't shoot! We ain't got much, but you can have it all." Clara's fingers found the small derringer she'd hidden in her skirt pocket, a parting gift from her younger brother Thomas, who'd been the only one to see her off at the Boston train station 3 weeks ago. "It's just for show," he'd told her, pressing it into her palm. "God willing, you'll never need to use it." She wrapped her hand around it now, the metal cold and wholly inadequate against the thunder of hoofbeats and gunfire surrounding her. The wagon lurched again as rough hands grabbed at the tailgate. Clara scrambled backward, her carefully pinned hair coming loose, auburn curls falling across her face. A man vaulted into the wagon bed, young, with cruel eyes visible above his bandana. He spotted her immediately, and his eyes lit up with something that made her blood turn to ice water. "Well, well, looky what we got here." He reached for her ankle. Clara didn't think. She pulled the derringer from her pocket and fired. The sound in the confined space of the wagon was deafening, and the recoil nearly broke her wrist, but the bullet went wide, splintering the wood near the man's shoulder. He jerked back with a curse, then his expression shifted from surprise to fury. "You little—" That's when the world exploded for the second time. The sound of a rifle, a different rifle, heavier, more authoritative, cracked across the plains like a whip. The young outlaw who'd been reaching for Clara jerked, his eyes going wide, and then he was falling backward out of the wagon, a red stain blooming across his shoulder. More shots followed in rapid succession, each one precise and deliberate. Clara heard screaming, not hers, but the outlaw's, punctuated by the terrified neighing of horses. She pressed herself flat against the wagon floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. "Ride, ride, damn you!" someone yelled, and then there was only the thunder of retreating hoofbeats, fading into the distance like a passing storm. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing and the creak of the damaged wagon settling on its axle. Clara lay there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, waiting for her hands to stop shaking, waiting for her mind to catch up with what had just happened. "Ma'am?" The voice came from outside the wagon, low and measured. "They're gone. You can come out now." Clara pushed herself up slowly, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. She crawled to the back of the wagon and peered out, blinking against the sudden brightness of the afternoon sun. A man stood there, maybe 10 feet away, his rifle still raised and ready. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty trail coat. A dark hat shadowed his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the careful way he held himself, like a loaded gun that hadn't quite decided whether to fire. "You hurt?" he asked. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "No." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I don't think so." The man lowered his rifle slightly, and she saw his eyes for the first time. Gray as storm clouds, set in a face weathered by sun and wind, and what looked like too many years of hard living. He couldn't have been more than 35, but there was something ancient in those eyes, something that had seen things no one should have to see. "Your driver's dead," he said, with the flat delivery of a man reporting the weather. "Shot through the heart, probably didn't feel much." Clara's stomach lurched. She'd barely known Hewitt, had hired him only 3 days ago for the final leg of her journey, but the casual brutality of his death hit her like a physical blow. "Oh God." "Your wagon's in bad shape too. Axle's cracked, water barrel's gone, and—" The stranger walked around the side, examining the damage with a practiced eye. "Yeah, this isn't going anywhere without repairs. Where were you headed?" "Silver Creek." The words came automatically, even as her mind was still trying to process everything that had happened. "I'm supposed to teach at the schoolhouse there. I'm Clara Whitmore." The man didn't offer his own name immediately. Instead, he moved to where Hewitt's body lay crumpled in the driver's seat and pulled a blanket from somewhere, covering the old man with surprising gentleness. Only then did he turn back to her. "Silver Creek's 30 miles west. You won't make it before nightfall, even if this wagon was sound." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling of being assessed, measured, weighed in some internal scale she couldn't see. "Those men who hit you, they ride for Rance Barton. Meanest son of a bitch between here and California. I've been tracking them for 2 months. Clara climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs, her careful traveling dress, a sensible brown wool that had seemed so practical back in Boston, now torn and stained with dust and Hewitt's blood. "You saved my life." "Maybe." The man's expression didn't change. "Or maybe I just happened to be hunting the same wolves that decided to take a bite out of you. Either way, you're alive and they're running scared. That counts for something." "Who are you?" He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and in that pause Clara sensed layers of story, of history, of things left carefully unspoken. "Name's Luke Granger. I used to be a U.S. Marshal, up Colorado way. Now I'm just a man with unfinished business." The way he said it, flat, matter-of-fact, with no trace of pride or shame, made Clara's skin prickle. This wasn't a man on some noble quest. This was someone who'd stripped away everything except purpose, who'd whittled himself down to a single sharp edge. "Unfinished business," she repeated. "With Rance Barton?" Luke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Him and his whole damn gang. They got a debt to pay, and I aim to collect." The sun was starting its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the endless prairie in shades of gold and amber. Clara looked at her ruined wagon, at the body of the man who'd been alive and complaining about his rheumatism just an hour ago, at the scattered remains of everything she'd brought west with her, her books, her clothes, the small painting of her mother she'd packed so carefully in tissue paper, her whole life reduced to wreckage on the Wyoming plains. "I don't suppose," she said, hearing the tremor in her own voice and hating it, "that your unfinished business happens to be heading toward Silver Creek?" Luke studied her again with those storm cloud eyes. "Might be. Barton's been seen in those parts recently." "Then I'd like to propose a trade, Mr. Granger." Clara drew herself up as straight as she could, channeling every ounce of the Whitmore steel her father had always said ran through her veins. "You get me to Silver Creek safely, and I'll tell you everything I know about the town. I may be new, but I've been corresponding with the school board for months. I know who's who, where people gather, what the layout is like. If Barton's there, that information might be useful to a man with unfinished business." Something that might have been respect flickered across Luke's face. "You always this practical when people try to kill you?" "This is the first time people have tried to kill me, Mr. Granger. I'm improvising." Clara managed a smile that felt only slightly hysterical. "Though I'll admit getting shot at wasn't part of my carefully planned journey west." "Carefully planned," Luke muttered, looking at the wreckage again. "Right." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right, Miss Whitmore, we've got a deal, but we do this my way. That means you follow orders, you don't ask questions when I tell you to move, and you sure as hell don't pull any more fool stunts like shooting at armed outlaws with a derringer that couldn't stop a determined rabbit. Clara felt her cheeks flush. I was defending myself. You were making yourself a bigger target. There's a difference. Luke walked to where his horse stood ground-tied about 20 yards away, a big buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that spoke of long training. He came back leading the animal, along with a pack mule she hadn't noticed before. We'll take what we can carry from your wagon, food, blankets, anything else that's essential. Everything else stays. My books won't keep you alive if we get caught in the open after dark. Luke's tone wasn't unkind, but it was absolutely final. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, but that's the reality out here. You want to survive, you learn to leave things behind. Clara bit back the argument that wanted to spring to her lips. He was right, of course. She'd learned that much in her 3 weeks of traveling. The West didn't care about your attachments, your plans, your carefully constructed sense of what mattered. The West cared only about what kept you breathing from one moment to the next. Together they salvaged what they could. A bedroll, some dried food that hadn't been stolen, a canteen that had somehow survived the attack. Clara's hands shook as she picked through the wreckage, and she was grateful when Luke didn't comment on it. Some of her clothes had been trampled by the outlaws' horses, but she managed to find a spare dress and her winter coat, rolled tight and strapped to the mule's pack saddle. That derringer, Luke said as she was finishing. You know how to actually use it? I hit what I was aiming for, Clara said defensively. You missed by 2 feet and nearly shot yourself in the process. He held out his hand. Give it here. Reluctantly, Clara pulled the little gun from her pocket. Luke examined it, checked the remaining round, then handed it back with a slight shake of his head. Single shot left. Make it count if you have to use it, but for God's sake, aim for center mass and brace your wrist. And Miss Whitmore? Yes? Next time you're in a fight for your life, don't close your eyes when you pull the trigger. Her cheeks burned. I didn't. You did. But there was something almost gentle in the way he said it. A recognition of her fear without judgment. It's natural. Most people do, first time. But out here, natural gets you killed. Remember that. The sun was touching the horizon by the time Luke finished burying Hewitt in a shallow grave marked with stones. He stood over it for a moment, hat in hand, but didn't say any words. Clara wondered if he'd done this before, buried strangers who'd died in the wrong place at the wrong time. Wondered how many graves he'd left behind in his wake. We need to move, Luke said, settling his hat back on his head. There's a creek about 5 miles north. Good place to make camp for the night. We'll be off the main trail. Harder for anyone to stumble across us. You think they'll come back? The outlaws? Barton's men? Luke's expression was grim. Maybe. Probably not tonight. They'll be licking their wounds, reorganizing. But they'll remember you. They'll remember there was a woman in that wagon and that she's still alive. Men like that, they don't like leaving loose ends. The words sent a chill down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze picking up across the plains. I see. Don't worry. Luke moved to his horse, checking the cinch with practiced efficiency. You're under my protection now. That means something. Clara wanted to ask what exactly it meant. Wanted to ask about the shadows in his eyes, the careful way he moved, the sense of coiled violence just barely held in check. But she'd learned enough about Luke Granger in the past hour to know that pressing for answers would get her nowhere. He was a man who'd share what he wanted, when he wanted, and not a moment before. I've never ridden a horse, she admitted, as Luke prepared to help her mount. He paused, one hand on the saddle. Never? Carriages, yes. Horses, no. My father considered it unladylike. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Her father. The man who'd tried to sell her to the highest bidder, who'd seen his own daughter as nothing more than a business transaction. The man she'd fled 3,000 miles to escape. Luke noticed the tone, she could tell, but he didn't pry. Instead, he just nodded and said, All right, you'll ride with me then. It'll be easier anyway. I can keep you steady if we need to move fast. Before Clara could protest, he'd lifted her up into the saddle with surprising ease, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her as he gathered the reins, and she was suddenly, acutely aware of the solid wall of his chest at her back, the heat of him cutting through the evening chill. Relax, he said quietly, close to her ear. "Buck here's steady as they come. You're safe." Safe. The word seemed almost absurd given everything that had happened, everything that could still happen. But as Luke nudged the buckskin into an easy walk, the mule following behind on a lead rope, Clara found herself believing it, or at least wanting to believe it. They rode in silence as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. The prairie stretched out in all directions, endless and empty. And for the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt the true weight of just how far she'd come, how completely she'd severed herself from everything she'd known. "You're a long way from home," Luke said, as if reading her thoughts. "I don't have a home anymore." The words came out before she could stop them. "Not really. I had a house, a family, a life that was all planned out for me. But that's not the same thing as a home, is it?" Luke was quiet for a moment. "No," he finally said. "I suppose it's not." They found the creek just as full darkness fell, a thin ribbon of water running through a stand of cottonwood trees that provided cover and the sound of running water to mask their presence. Luke helped Clara down from the horse with the same careful efficiency he seemed to bring to everything, then set about making camp with the quick competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Clara tried to help, but she was awkward and uncertain, and after the third time she nearly knocked over the coffee pot, Luke gently suggested she sit down and rest. "I'm not useless," she said, hating how defensive she sounded. "Never said you were." Luke had a small fire going now, just enough to heat water and provide a little warmth without sending up a beacon of smoke. "But you've had a hell of a day, Miss Whitmore. No shame in taking a moment to catch your breath." So Clara sat on a flat rock near the fire and watched as Luke set up their camp, checking on the horse and mule, laying out the bedroll, heating up some of the dried beans they'd salvaged from her wagon. His movements were precise, economical, nothing wasted. A man who'd learned to survive on the thin edge between life and death. "How long have you been hunting them?" she asked finally. "Barton and his gang." Luke's hand stilled for just a moment over the coffee pot. 2 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. The precision of the answer told her everything she needed to know about what drove him. This wasn't just business. This was personal. "May I ask why?" "You can ask." Luke poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. "Whether I answer is another matter." Clara wrapped her cold hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth. "You said you used to be a marshal. Past tense, what happened?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't respond. He stared into the fire, his face carved from shadows and flickering light, and Clara was about to apologize for prying when he spoke. 3 years ago, I had a wife and a daughter, Sarah and Emma." His voice was carefully neutral, each word measured out like coins. "We were living in Denver. I was working for the Territorial Marshal's office, tracking outlaws, bringing them in for trial. It was good work, important work." Past tense. Claire's heart began to sink. Rance Barton was running a protection racket in the city, shaking down businesses, killing anyone who didn't pay. I arrested him, testified at his trial, watched him get sentenced to 15 years hard labor. Luke's jaw tightened. 2 months later, he escaped, and the first thing he did, the very first thing, was come for my family. Claire's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, God." "I was out tracking horse thieves. Routine job, should have been back in 3 days. But there was a storm, flash flooding, and we got delayed. By the time I made it home," Luke's voice finally cracked just a little. "By the time I made it home, they'd been dead for 2 days. Sarah and Emma, 8 years old, my little girl. She still had her doll clutched in her hand when I found her. Tears burned at the corners of Clara's eyes. I'm so sorry. I turned in my badge the next day. Told the marshal I was done with bringing men in for trial, done watching them escape or get light sentences or walk free on technicalities. I was going after Barton myself, and I was going to see him hang if I had to drag him to the gallows by my bare hands. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and rage and a terrible, inexorable purpose. Clara understood now why Luke moved the way he did, why there was that sense of barely contained violence beneath his careful control. He was a man who'd been hollowed out by loss and filled back up with nothing but the need for justice. Or maybe just revenge. That's why you're here, she said softly. Why you saved me. Because I remind you of them. Luke's head came up, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. No, he said firmly. I saved you because it was the right thing to do. Because leaving you to die would have made me the same as them, and I won't be that. Won't let them make me that. But you're still hunting them. Until every last one of them is dead or behind bars. Yes. Luke's voice was flat again, emotionless. Barton most of all. He's the one who gave the order. He's the one who looked my wife in the eyes and pulled the trigger while my daughter watched. He's the one who has to pay. Clara set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking again. She'd thought her own story was dramatic, fleeing an arranged marriage, escaping her father's control, running west to start a new life. But compared to what Luke had suffered, her problem seemed almost trivial. The man who was going to marry me, she heard herself say. His name was Cornelius Ashford. He was 53 years old, and he'd buried 2 wives already. My father said it was a good match, that Cornelius had money and position, and I should be grateful for the opportunity. When I tried to refuse, my father... She touched her cheek, where the bruise had finally started to fade. Well, let's just say he made his disappointment clear. Luke's eyes darkened. He hit you. Once. But it was enough. Clara looked down at her hands. I took what money I had saved, packed a bag, and left in the middle of the night. Caught a train west and never looked back. Thomas, my brother, helped me. He's the only one who knows where I am. And the teaching position? I have a degree from Mount Holyoke. One of the advantages of having a father who believed education made daughters more marriageable. The bitterness was back in her voice. I wrote to every school board between here and California, offering my services. Silver Creek was the first to respond. They're desperate for a qualified teacher, apparently. Desperate enough to hire a woman sight unseen. Luke stood and added another stick to the fire, though it didn't really need it. Clara had the sense he needed to move, to do something with his hands. So we're both running, he said finally. You from the life you didn't want. Me from the one I can't have anymore. I suppose we are. They were quiet for a while after that, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the gentle murmur of the creek. Clara found herself studying Luke in the flickering light, the lines around his eyes, the gray starting to thread through the dark hair at his temples, the way his hand rested casually on the butt of his pistol, even as he tried to relax. A man permanently on guard. What will you do? She asked. After. When Barton's dead or captured and your business is finished. Luke's laugh was short and harsh. Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. Didn't seem like there was much point. But there must be something, some dream, some plan. Dreams are for people who have a future, Miss Whitmore. I stopped having those the day I found Sarah and Emma. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw the raw honesty in his eyes. I'm a ghost already. I'm just going through the motions until it's over. That's a terrible way to live. Maybe, but it's the only way I know how anymore. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that there was always hope, always a chance for something better. But the words died in her throat because who was she to lecture him about loss? She'd left behind a comfortable life by choice. Luke had his ripped away in blood and violence. Instead, she just said quietly, Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you were there today. Glad you're here now. Even if you think you're just a ghost, you saved my life. That has to count for something. Something shifted in Luke's expression, some small crack in the armor he wore. Maybe, he said, so softly she almost didn't hear it. Maybe it does. They finished their meager dinner in companionable silence, and when Luke laid out the single bedroll they had, Clara realized with a start that they'd be sharing it. The thought sent a flutter of something through her stomach, nerves, definitely, but also something else she didn't want to examine too closely. I'll take first watch, Luke said, settling himself with his back against a tree trunk, rifle across his lap. You get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Clara lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The ground was hard beneath her, nothing like the feather mattress she'd slept on in Boston, and every sound in the darkness, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, the distant cry of a coyote made her tense. But Luke's presence, solid and watchful in the darkness, was oddly comforting. "Mr. Granger?" she said softly. "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything. Get some sleep, Miss Whitmore." But as Clara closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of Luke's breathing keeping watch over her, she found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, they'd both found something neither of them had expected out here on the Wyoming plains. Not salvation, exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it. The first fragile hope that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. And in the darkness, under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt across black velvet, two broken souls began the slow, uncertain process of learning how to be whole again. Clara woke to the sound of Luke moving quietly around the camp, the sky still more black than blue, stars fading like dying embers. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. Every muscle protested as she tried to stretch, reminding her exactly how far removed she was from her former life of soft beds and morning tea brought up by servants. "Sun'll be up in 20 minutes, Luke said, not looking at her as he saddled Buck. "We need to be moving by then. Less chance of being spotted in the early light." Clara nodded, pushing herself to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. Her hair was a disaster, her dress wrinkled beyond repair, and she was fairly certain she had dirt smudged across her cheek. The proper Boston lady she'd been raised to be would have been mortified. The woman she was becoming just accepted it as part of survival. Luke handed her a piece of jerky and what was left of the coffee from last night. Cold now, but still bitter enough to shock her system awake. "It's not much," he said, "but it'll keep you going until we can stop for a real meal." "It's fine." Clara chewed the tough meat, trying not to think about the breakfast spread that would have been waiting for her back in Boston. Fresh eggs, toast with butter and jam, maybe even bacon if the cook was feeling generous. "I'm learning that out here, fine has a very different definition than it did back east." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Luke's face. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Whitmore. Most Boston ladies I've known would still be crying about their lost luggage." "Yes, well," Clara swallowed the last of her coffee. "Most Boston ladies haven't had their father try to auction them off to the highest bidder. Tends to put losing a trunk of dresses into perspective." Luke's expression sobered. "Your father really did that? Tried to force you into marriage?" Cornelius Ashford offered him $15,000 in a business partnership. In my father's eyes, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was inventory. The words came out flat, matter of fact, though underneath Clara could still feel the hot shame and rage of that moment when she'd realized her father saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be traded. When I refused, he said I was being ungrateful, hysterical, that I didn't understand what was good for me. And when you still refused. Luke was watching her carefully now, his gray eyes sharp. Clara touched her cheek again, the bruise barely visible now but still tender. He made his position clear, so I made mine. I left that very night. Luke was quiet for a long moment, packing up their meager camp with quick, efficient movements. Finally he said, "Your father's a coward and a fool. Any man who'd sell his own daughter doesn't deserve to have one." The simple declaration, delivered without heat or drama, made something tight in Clara's chest loosen just a fraction. "Thank you," she said softly. "Nothing to thank me for. It's just the truth." Luke helped her up onto Buck's back, then swung up behind her. "Now, we've got hard riding ahead. Silver Creek's still 25 miles west, and we'll be crossing open country for most of it. Stay alert, stay quiet, and if I tell you to do something, you do it without question. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and rose. Clara had never seen anything quite like it. The sheer vastness of the land, the endless sky, the way the light seemed to set the grass on fire. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, this new world she'd thrown herself into. For the first few miles, they rode in silence, Luke's attention fixed on the horizon, scanning constantly for any sign of movement. Clara tried to stay still, tried not to be a burden, but her inexperience with horses was obvious. Every time Buck shifted his gait or stumbled over rough ground, she tensed, her hands gripping the saddle horn until her knuckles turned white. Relax, Luke said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. You're fighting him. Let yourself move with him, not against him. I'm trying, Clara said through gritted teeth. It's harder than it looks. Everything worth doing is. But there was patience in his voice now, not judgment. His arm came around her waist, steadying her. Here. Feel how I'm sitting? Not rigid, but not loose either. Like you're part of the horse, not just a passenger. Clara tried to mimic his posture, to find that balance between tension and surrender. It took a while, longer than she wanted to admit, but gradually she felt herself starting to understand the rhythm, the way Buck moved beneath them. When she finally started to relax, she felt Luke's approval in the slight easing of his grip. Better, he said. You're a quick learner. I had good motivation not to fall off and break my neck. Luke's chest moved against her back in what might have been a laugh. It was such a small thing, that almost laugh, but it made Clara unreasonably happy. She'd begun to think the man didn't remember how. By mid-morning, the sun was high and hot. The coolness of dawn burned away by the relentless Wyoming heat. Clara's throat was dry, her back aching from hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Luke had given her water from his canteen twice already, and she knew they had to ration what little they had until they could refill at the next creek or spring. Tell me about Silver Creek, Luke said suddenly, breaking the long silence. You said you've been corresponding with the school board. What do you know about the town? Clara was grateful for the distraction from her discomfort. It's small, maybe 200 people, give or take. The school board chairman is a man named Josiah Mercer. He owns the general store. There's a sheriff, Benjamin Cole, who's apparently well-respected but getting on in years. The town has a church, a hotel, a saloon, and not much else. Most people are ranchers or work for ranchers. Silver Creek Hotel, Luke mused. That where Barton would be staying? If he's there at all, it's the only hotel in town, according to Mr. Mercer's letters, though he also mentioned that some of the rougher types tend to camp just outside of town, near a place called Copper Canyon. Says the law doesn't venture out there much. Luke's jaw tightened. Copper Canyon. That sounds like exactly the kind of place Barton would hole up. Close enough to town to cause trouble, far enough out to avoid the law. You think he's really there? I know he is. Luke's certainty was absolute. I've been tracking him since Denver. He's been moving west, hitting towns and ranches along the way, always staying a few steps ahead. But his pattern's been consistent. He finds a place where the law is weak or stretched thin, sets up shop for a few weeks, bleeds the town dry, then moves on. Silver Creek fits that pattern perfectly. Clara felt a chill despite the heat. And you're going to what? Walk into town and arrest him yourself? Something like that. Luke's tone suggested he hadn't quite worked out all the details yet. First, I need to figure out how many men he's got with him, where they're camped, what their routine is. Then I'll decide how to move. That doesn't sound like much of a plan. It's the plan I've got. Luke shifted slightly, adjusting their course to follow a dry creek bed that offered more cover than the open prairie. I've been a lawman long enough to know that plans rarely survive first contact with reality anyway. Better to stay flexible, adapt to what you find. And what about me? Clara asked. What happens when we get to Silver Creek? You go to your schoolhouse, start your new job, live your life. Luke's voice was carefully neutral. My business with Barton doesn't have to be yours. But it already is, isn't it? Clara turned her head, trying to see his face. Those men yesterday, they saw me. You said yourself they don't like leaving loose ends. Even if I go to Silver Creek and play the innocent school teacher, if Barton finds out I survived that attack, if he connects me to you, he won't. But Luke didn't sound entirely convinced. I'll make sure of it. How? By keeping me locked in the schoolhouse while you hunt outlaws? That's not a life, Mr. Granger. That's just a different kind of prison. Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I can't let you get hurt. Not because of me, not because of them. I won't have another woman's death on my conscience. The raw pain in those words made Clara's heart clench. I'm not your wife, she said gently. You can't protect me from everything, and you shouldn't have to. I made my own choices, took my own risks. Whatever happens now, that's on me, not you. That's not how it works. Then how does it work? Clara challenged. You carry the weight of the whole world on your shoulders until it crushes you? You punish yourself for every bad thing that happens to anyone in your vicinity? That's not justice, Mr. Granger. That's just slow suicide. Luke's entire body went rigid behind her. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Clara pressed on, knowing she was probably overstepping but unable to stop herself. You said yourself you're just going through the motions until it's over, that you stopped having dreams when your family died. That sounds like a man who's already given up on living, who's just waiting for death to catch up with him. That's enough. Luke's voice was hard now, cold as winter steel. This conversation is over. They rode in tense silence after that. The easy camaraderie of the morning evaporated. Clara wanted to apologize, to take back her words, but she also believed them. Luke Granger was a good man destroying himself in the name of vengeance, and someone needed to tell him that before it was too late. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Luke barely looked at her as he helped her down from Buck's back, and when he handed her water and more jerky, his movements were mechanical, distant. Clara sat on a flat rock and watched him check the horse's hooves, adjust the pack saddle on the mule, do everything he could to avoid talking to her. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have said those things. It wasn't my place. Luke didn't respond immediately. He finished checking Buck's shoes, then straightened up, his back still to her. My wife used to say the same things, he said quietly, that I took too much on myself, that I couldn't save everyone no matter how hard I tried. She worried I'd burn myself out, that one day the job would take more than I had to give. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. Luke turned then, and Clara saw the naked grief in his eyes. And then, the one time I wasn't there, the one time I couldn't protect her, she paid for my failure with her life. So don't tell me I'm wrong to carry that weight, Miss Whitmore. I earned it. You didn't fail her, Clara said firmly. Evil men made evil choices. You can't take responsibility for that. I was a marshal. Protecting people was my job, my family most of all. Luke's hands clenched into fists at his sides. And I failed. Simple as that. Clara stood up, closing the distance between them. If you really believe that, if you really think you failed, then honor them by living, by being the kind of man they would have been proud of, not by throwing your life away on revenge. This isn't revenge, Luke said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is justice. Justice would be bringing Barton to trial, having him face the law, see him hang legally. What you're planning, that's revenge, pure and simple. And maybe he deserves it. Maybe they all do. But what happens to you when it's done? When you've killed every man in that gang and Barton's dead at your feet? Do you think you'll feel better? Do you think Sarah and Emma would want this for you? Luke flinched as if she'd struck him. Don't, he said hoarsely. Don't you dare speak their names like you knew them. You're right, I didn't know them. But I know what it's like to lose everything you thought your life would be. I know what it's like to have to choose between the person you were and the person you're becoming. And I know that the dead don't want us to die with them, Mr. Granger. They want us to live, to find joy again, even if it feels impossible, to honor their memory by being more than just grief and rage. For a long moment, Luke just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned away, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Talk to me. Tell me about them. About Sarah and Emma. Not how they died, but how they lived. What made them laugh? What were their dreams? What do you miss most? Luke was silent for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. But then, slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. Emma wanted to be a veterinarian. She was always bringing home injured animals, birds with broken wings, stray cats, one time a half-dead coyote pup that had been abandoned by its mother. Sarah would get so frustrated, said our house was turning into a menagerie. But she never made Emma get rid of them. She'd just sigh and help her daughter build another box to keep them in. A faint smile touched Luke's lips. Emma had this way of looking at me with those big green eyes. She got them from Sarah, and I'd melt. Couldn't deny her anything. She sounds wonderful, Clara said softly. She was. Luke's voice cracked. She was only 8, but she was already so smart, so full of life. She wanted to learn everything, try everything. And Sarah encouraged all of it. Said daughters should be raised to think for themselves, to have dreams beyond just marriage and children. Your father should have been more like my wife. I think I would have liked her very much. She would have liked you too. Sarah always said the world needed more women willing to stand up for themselves, to take risks for what they wanted. Luke looked at Clara then, really looked at her. She would have respected what you did, leaving Boston, running west to start over. Did she run too, from something? In a way. Her family wanted her to marry some banker in St. Louis, live a nice, safe city life. But Sarah met me at a barn dance when I was just a deputy, and she decided she'd rather have an uncertain life with a man she loved than a comfortable one with a man she didn't. Her parents disowned her for it. That must have been hard. It was. But Sarah never regretted it. She used to say that the best things in life were the ones you had to fight for. Luke's expression was distant now, lost in memory. Even at the end, even when things were bad, she'd find something to smile about, some small joy to hold on to. She taught Emma that too, to look for the light, even in dark times. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. They sound like they were remarkable women. They were. Luke's voice was barely a whisper. And I'd give anything to have them back, but I can't. So the least I can do is make sure the men who took them from me pay for what they did. Even if it cost you everything else? I don't have anything else left to lose. You have yourself, Clara said. You have the chance to be more than just an instrument of revenge, to build something new, even if it's not what you had before. That's not nothing, Mr. Granger. Luke opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was going to say was cut off by a sound in the distance, the faint drumbeat of approaching horses. His entire demeanor changed in an instant, going from vulnerable to deadly in a heartbeat. He put a finger to his lips, signaling Clara to be quiet, then moved swiftly to where his rifle leaned against a rock. Into the brush, he whispered urgently. Now. And don't make a sound. Clara didn't argue. She scrambled into the thick scrub that lined the dry creek bed, pressing herself flat against the ground, her heart hammering so hard she was sure whoever was coming would hear it. Luke was beside her a moment later, rifle ready, his eyes fixed on the horizon. They waited, barely breathing, as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Clara could see them now, 3 riders moving fast across the open prairie, heading roughly in their direction. They were still too far away to make out details, but something about the way they rode, the purposeful speed of their approach, made her blood run cold. Barton's men? She whispered, so quietly she barely heard herself. Luke nodded, his jaw tight. Has to be. They're tracking us. Must have found the wagon, figured out someone survived. What do we do? Stay hidden, hope they pass us by. Luke's finger was on the rifle's trigger, ready. If they don't, things are going to get loud real fast. When that happens, you run. Don't look back, don't try to help. Just run as far and fast as you can. Understand? I'm not leaving you. Clara. The use of her first name caught her off guard. If this goes bad, if they get me, you have to survive to tell the law what happened. Promise me. Before she could respond, one of the riders shouted something, pointing in their direction. They'd been spotted. Damn, Luke muttered. Then, louder, stay down! The riders changed course, heading straight for them now. Luke rose to one knee, bringing his rifle to bear. That's far enough, he shouted. State your business or ride on. The 3 men reined in their horses about 50 yards out, just at the edge of rifle range. Clara could see them more clearly now, hard men, weathered and armed with the casual cruelty of those who lived outside the law. The one in the middle, a lean man with a scarred face, called back, We're looking for someone, a woman, traveling alone. You seen her? This is open country, Luke responded, his voice giving nothing away. Lots of people pass through. What's your interest in this particular woman? Our interest is our business. Now, you going to answer the question, or are we going to have a problem? Luke's grip on the rifle tightened. I think you boys should ride on. Find your woman somewhere else. The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's what I thought. You got her with you, don't you? The one from the wagon. Don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. The man's hand moved toward his gun. Tell you what, friend, give us the woman and we'll let you ride away. You can even keep your hair. That's generous, considering you killed one of ours yesterday. That offer's not going to work for me, Luke said calmly. So here's my counter-proposal. You three turn those horses around and head back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Do that, and I'll let you live long enough to regret working for Rance Barton. The mention of Barton's name made the three men exchange glances. The scarred man's expression hardened. You know who we are. That means you're either law or a fool. Which is it? I'm the man who's going to put your boss 6 feet under, Luke said. And anyone who stands with him, last chance, boys, right away. The scarred man's hand went for his gun. Luke fired first. The shot echoed across the prairie like thunder, and the scarred man jerked backward in his saddle, a red stain blooming on his shoulder. His companions reacted instantly, drawing their own weapons, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire. Clara pressed herself into the dirt, her hands over her ears, watching in horrified fascination as Luke worked his rifle with mechanical precision. He fired, levered another round, fired again, each shot deliberate and controlled. One of the outlaws went down, tumbling from his horse with a scream. The other wheeled his mount around, trying to flee, but Luke's next shot caught him in the leg. The wounded man managed to stay in his saddle, galloping away across the prairie. The scarred man, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, followed, leaving their fallen companion behind. Stay down, Luke commanded, his eyes tracking the retreating riders until they disappeared over a rise. Only then did he lower his rifle, his face grim. Clara crawled out from the brush on shaking legs. Are they gone? For now. They'll be back, though, with more men. Luke was already moving, grabbing Buck's reins, checking the pack mule. We need to move, fast. They know we're here. They know we're heading west. We've got maybe an hour before they regroup and come after us with everything they've got. What about him? Clara gestured toward the fallen outlaw, who lay unmoving in the grass. Luke walked over, checked for a pulse, then shook his head. He's gone. Nothing we can do for him now. Clara, we need to leave. Now. They mounted up in frantic haste, Luke pushing Buck into a hard gallop that had Clara clinging to the saddle for dear life. The easy pace of the morning was gone, replaced by desperate speed as they raced across the prairie, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the men who hunted them. How many? Clara managed to gasp out as they rode. How many men does Barton have? Don't know for sure, Luke called back over the thunder of hooves. At least a dozen, maybe more. And now they're going to be mad as hell. We just killed one of theirs. This isn't just about covering up loose ends anymore. This is personal. What's our plan? Get to Silver Creek, find the sheriff, get you somewhere safe. Luke's arm tightened around her waist as they jumped a small ravine. Then I deal with Barton. You can't take on a dozen men alone. Watch me. They rode hard for the next 2 hours, only slowing when the horses began to flag, their sides heaving with exhaustion. Luke guided them into a narrow canyon, following a barely visible trail that wound between towering rock walls. Clara's entire body ached, her muscles screaming in protest, but she bit her lip and endured. Complaining wouldn't help anyone now. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Luke reined Buck to a halt beside a small spring that bubbled up from the rocks. We'll rest here for 15 minutes, water the horses, catch our breath. Clara practically fell out of the saddle, her legs barely holding her weight. She stumbled to the spring and drank deeply, the cold water shocking against her parched throat. When she looked up, Luke was scanning the canyon walls, his expression tense. Are they following us? She asked. If they're smart, yes. If they're careful, they might track us here. But this canyon's defensible if they do. Only one way in, one way out. Luke patted Buck's neck, murmuring something to the tired horse. We'll make it to Silver Creek by nightfall. Once we're there, you'll be safe. And you? I'll do what needs to be done. Clara walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. Luke, please, don't throw your life away on this. What happened to Sarah and Emma was a tragedy, but adding your death to the list won't bring them back. It won't make anything right. Luke looked down at her hand, then up at her face. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in his eyes, grief, longing, maybe even the faintest echo of hope. But then he shuddered it away, his expression going hard again. You don't understand, he said roughly. This is all I have left. This is the only thing that makes sense anymore. Without it, I'm just empty. No, Clara said fiercely. You're not empty. You're hurting. There's a difference. And healing is possible even when it doesn't feel like it, even when you think the pain is all you have left. Clara, Luke's voice cracked on her name. I know you think you died with them, she continued, refusing to let him look away. But you didn't. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of kindness and courage and all the things that made your wife fall in love with you in the first place. Don't waste that. Don't let Barton take that from you too. For a long moment, Luke just stood there, his jaw working as if he was fighting some internal battle. Then, slowly, he reached up and covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to be anything other than this anymore. Then maybe, Clara said gently, you let someone help you remember. They stood like that for a long moment, the canyon walls rising around them, the sound of water trickling over stone, the horses breathing softly nearby. In that small space of peace, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first fragile seed of something new taking root in scorched earth. Then Luke cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. We need to move. Sun's getting low. Clara nodded, understanding that he could only handle so much vulnerability at once. All right. They mounted up again, and as they rode out of the canyon toward Silver Creek, and whatever waited for them there, Clara found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, Luke Granger would find a reason to live beyond revenge. That maybe he'd remember how to dream again. That maybe, against all odds, both of them would find a way to build something new from the ashes of their old lives. The sun was painting the western sky in shades of crimson and gold when the buildings of Silver Creek finally came into view, rising from the prairie like a promise of civilization in the wilderness. Clara felt Luke's body relax slightly behind her, though his hand never strayed far from his pistol. They'd ridden the last 10 miles in tense silence, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit, but the prairie behind them had remained empty, the only movement the endless wave of grass bending in the wind. There, Luke said quietly, pointing toward the cluster of wooden structures ahead. That's Silver Creek. We made it. Clara sagged with relief, every muscle in her body aching from the long hours in the saddle. Thank God. I wasn't sure my back could take much more. You did good, Luke said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. Better than most greenhorns I've known. Some men twice your size would have been crying for their mothers after a ride like that. Despite her exhaustion, Clara felt a small flush of pride. I had good motivation to keep up. Getting killed by outlaws seemed like poor thanks for the education my father paid for. Luke's chest moved against her back in what might have been a quiet laugh, and Clara found herself smiling despite everything. They were both exhausted, both terrified, both running toward an uncertain future with dangerous men on their trail. But somehow, in the midst of all that darkness, they'd found these small moments of light, these brief instances where the weight lifted just enough to let them breathe. As they approached the town, Clara could make out more details. Silver Creek was indeed small, maybe 20 buildings in total, clustered along a single main street that ran roughly north to south. The largest structure appeared to be a 2-story building with a sign that read Silver Creek Hotel in faded letters. Across from it stood what had to be the general store, its windows displaying various goods behind dusty glass. Further down, she could see a saloon, a church with a modest steeple, and a squat building with bars on the windows that could only be the sheriff's office. It was early evening, and the street was mostly empty, just a few people moving between buildings, going about their end-of-day business. A woman in a simple calico dress swept the steps of the general store. 2 men stood outside the saloon, smoking and talking in low voices. Everything looked peaceful, normal, untouched by the violence that had followed Clara and Luke across 30 miles of prairie. Looks quiet, Clara observed. Too quiet, Luke muttered. If Barton's here, he's keeping a low profile. That worries me more than if he was making a spectacle of himself. They rode slowly down the main street, and Clara felt the weight of curious eyes following them. A stranger riding into town with a woman in tow was bound to attract attention, especially when that woman looked like she'd been dragged through hell backward. Clara was acutely aware of how she must appear. Her dress torn and stained, her hair falling loose from its pins, her face likely streaked with dust and sweat. Not exactly the picture of refinement the school board had probably been expecting. Luke guided Buck toward the building with the bars on the windows. A wooden sign hanging above the door confirmed it was indeed the sheriff's office. He dismounted first, then helped Clara down, his hands steady at her waist. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and Luke kept his grip on her until she found her balance. "Easy," he said softly. "Take a moment." Clara nodded, breathing deeply, willing her trembling muscles to cooperate. Around them, she could feel more eyes watching, hear the whispers starting. By tomorrow, the whole town would know about their arrival. There would be questions, speculation, gossip. Her carefully planned quiet entrance to Silver Creek had been thoroughly ruined. "Let me do the talking," Luke said quietly as they approached the door. "Sheriff might be friendly, might not. Either way, we need to feel him out before we say too much." Clara nodded her agreement, and Luke pushed open the door. The interior of the sheriff's office was dim and stuffy, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner despite the warm evening. A desk sat near the front window, covered in papers and wanted posters, and behind it sat a man who had to be Sheriff Benjamin Cole. He was older than Clara had expected, probably in his mid-60s, with iron-gray hair and a face lined by years of sun and responsibility. He looked up as they entered, his sharp blue eyes taking in their disheveled appearance with obvious concern. "Help you folks?" he asked, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who'd spent his whole life in this part of the country. Luke removed his hat. "Sheriff Cole? Name's Luke Granger. This is Miss Clara Whitmore. We've had some trouble on the road from Cheyenne. Wondered if we might have a word." Recognition flickered across Cole's face at Luke's name. The sheriff stood slowly, his hand moving almost unconsciously toward the gun belt hanging on a nearby peg. "Luke Granger. I've heard that name. Used to be a marshal up Denver way, if I'm remembering right." "You're remembering right," Luke confirmed, his tone carefully neutral. "Though that was a few years back. Heard about what happened to your family, too." "My condolences." Cole's expression was sympathetic but wary. "What brings you to Silver Creek, Mr. Granger? And what kind of trouble are we talking about?" Luke glanced at Clara, then back to the sheriff. "Miss Whitmore here was on her way to take up a teaching position in your town. She was attacked by Rance Barton's gang yesterday, about 30 miles east. Her driver was killed, her wagon destroyed. I happened to be in the area and was able to drive them off, but they've been tracking us since. We had another encounter this afternoon. One of them is dead, 2 wounded. The rest will be coming with reinforcements." Cole's face had gone pale during this recitation. He sank back into his chair as if his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "Jesus Christ, Barton's gang? Here?" "You didn't know?" Luke's voice sharpened. "I thought you'd have heard reports. Barton's been working his way west for months, hitting towns all along the route. Silver Creek's exactly his type of target. Small, isolated, law enforcement stretched thin." "We've had some trouble," Cole admitted reluctantly. "Cattle rustling, a few robberies, but nothing that pointed to Barton specifically. If I'd known—" He trailed off, running a hand through his gray hair. "How many men does he have?" "At least a dozen, maybe more. Hard to say exactly." Luke leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Sheriff, I need to know. Is Barton in Silver Creek right now?" Cole hesitated, and in that pause, Clara saw the answer written plain as day on his weathered face. The sheriff knew something he didn't want to share. "Sheriff?" Luke's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "If you know where Barton is, you need to tell me. Lives are at stake." "There's a group of men camped out near Copper Canyon," Cole finally said, each word dragged out reluctantly. "Been there about a week. They've been coming into town, drinking at the saloon, spending money freely, causing some trouble, but nothing I could arrest them for. I rode out there once to have a word, tell them to keep things peaceful. There was a red-haired man who seemed to be in charge. Never gave his name, but he had that look about him. You know the type. Hard eyes, dangerous." "That's him?" Luke said grimly. "That's Barton. How many at the camp?" "I counted 8, but there could be more. The canyon's got caves, places to hide." Cole looked genuinely distressed now. Mr. Granger, I'm an old man with one deputy who's barely 20 years old. If Barton's really out there with a dozen armed men, I don't have the resources to take them on. I'd need to send for the territorial marshal, get proper backup. By the time they arrive, Barton will be gone. He always moves before the law can catch up. Luke straightened, his decision clearly made. I'm going after him myself. That's suicide, Cole protested. One man against a whole gang? Even if you were still wearing a badge, which you're not, that's a fool's errand. Then I'm a fool. Luke's voice was flat, final. But I'm not letting him slip away again, not when I'm this close. Clara had been silent through this exchange, but now she stepped forward. Sheriff Cole, I'm Clara Whitmore. Josiah Mercer hired me to teach at the schoolhouse. I need to get word to him that I've arrived, and I need somewhere safe to stay, preferably somewhere away from all this. Cole's expression softened as he looked at her. Miss Whitmore, yes. Josiah's been expecting you, though not quite in these circumstances. The schoolhouse has a small apartment attached. That was meant to be your lodging. I can take you there myself. Make sure you're settled. Thank you, Clara said. Then before Luke could protest, she added, but first, Mr. Granger needs proper rest and supplies. He's been protecting me for 2 days straight without sleep. The least this town can do is offer him a meal and a bed before he goes off on his mission. Luke shot her a sharp look, clearly understanding what she was doing, trying to slow him down, give him time to think, maybe even change his mind. But he didn't contradict her. Perhaps he was too tired, or perhaps some part of him recognized the wisdom in her words. Cole nodded slowly. The hotel can put you both up. Martha Henshaw runs it. She's a good woman, asks few questions. Get yourselves cleaned up, get some food in you. We can talk more in the morning about how to handle this situation. With respect, Sheriff, I'm not waiting until morning, Luke said. But a few hours to rest and plan wouldn't go amiss. And Miss Whitmore needs to be somewhere secure. The schoolhouse is at the far end of town, nice and quiet. I'll have my deputy Tommy keep an eye on it tonight. Anyone tries to cause trouble, they'll have to go through him. Cole stood again, reaching for his gun belt. Let me walk you folks over to the hotel, then I'll take Miss Whitmore to the schoolhouse myself. They stepped back out into the evening air, which had cooled significantly as the sun sank below the horizon. The street was darker now, lit only by the warm glow of lamplight spilling from windows and the larger blaze coming from the saloon. As they walked toward the hotel, Clara noticed several rough-looking men lounging outside the saloon, watching them with undisguised interest. Friends of yours, Sheriff? Luke asked quietly, his hand near his gun. More like thorns in my side, Cole replied with equal quiet. Those would be some of Barton's men. They've been practically living at the saloon since they arrived, getting drunk, starting fights, bothering the working girls. But like I said, nothing I can arrest them for without proof of actual crimes. Luke studied the men with cold assessment. How many usually come into town? 4 or 5 at a time, rotating out. Never the red-haired one, though. He stays at the camp. Cole's voice dropped even lower. Mr. Granger, whatever you're planning, please don't do it in the middle of my town. I've got good people here who don't deserve to get caught in the crossfire. I'll do my best to keep it away from civilians, Luke promised. But Sheriff, you need to understand something. Rance Barton murdered my wife and 8-year-old daughter in cold blood. He's been terrorizing innocent people from here to Denver. If I get a chance to end him, I'm taking it, regardless of where we are. You want to protect your town? Help me, or at least stay out of my way. Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I can't officially support vigilante justice, Mr. Granger. But off the record, I hope you send that bastard straight to hell. They reached the hotel, a weathered 2-story building that had clearly seen better days but still maintained a certain dignity. Cole pushed open the door, triggering a small bell that announced their arrival. A woman emerged from a back room, Martha Henshaw, Clara assumed. She was perhaps 50, with kind eyes and capable hands, the sort of woman who'd seen enough of life not to be easily shocked. Evening, Sheriff, she said, then took in Clara and Luke's appearance with barely a raised eyebrow. Looks like you folks have had a rough time of it. Let me guess. You need rooms? 2 rooms, Luke said firmly, shooting Clara a look that brooked no argument. And a bath if you can manage it, plus dinner sent up. I can manage all of that, Martha assured him. Rooms are $2 a night, bath is 50 cents extra, and dinner will be whatever I've got left from the supper service, which tonight is beef stew and cornbread. That work for you? Luke nodded and counted out coins from a worn leather pouch. As Martha prepared their keys, Clara caught Luke's arm. "I don't have any money," she said quietly, embarrassed. "The outlaws took everything." "It's covered," Luke said. "Consider it part of getting you to Silver Creek safely. I'll pay you back. Once I start teaching, Clara." He said her name gently, and she realized it was the second time he'd used her first name without the formal miss. "It's fine. Just promise me you'll stay here tonight, stay safe, lock your door, and don't open it for anyone except Sheriff Cole." "What about you?" "I'll be in the room next to yours." Luke's expression was carefully neutral, but Clara could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting toward the street, toward where Barton's men lounged outside the saloon. "I need to think, make a plan, figure out the best way to approach this." Martha handed them their keys, rooms 5 and 6 on the second floor, and promised to have water heated for baths within the hour. Sheriff Cole cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Miss Whitmore, if you'd like, I can still take you to the schoolhouse tonight. Get you settled in your own place." Clara glanced at Luke, who gave a slight shake of his head. "Tomorrow would be better, Sheriff," she said. "I'm so exhausted I can barely stand. If Mr. Henshaw doesn't mind, I'd prefer to stay here tonight and get properly established tomorrow." "Mrs. Henshaw," Martha corrected with a smile. "And of course you're welcome to stay. Lord knows you look like you could use a good night's rest." Cole nodded his acceptance. "I'll come by first thing in the morning then. We can walk over to the schoolhouse together, and I'll introduce you to Josiah and the school board." He tipped his hat to both of them. "Mr. Granger, try not to start a war before sunrise, would you?" "No promises, Sheriff." Cole left, and Martha showed them upstairs to their adjacent rooms. Clara's was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. Luke's room was identical, their doors separated by perhaps 6 feet of hallway. It felt both too close and not close enough. "Bathwater will be up shortly," Martha said. "I'll have Tommy bring it up. He's my nephew, helps around the place, and I'll send dinner up as soon as it's ready. Anything else you need?" "Do you have any women's clothing?" Clara asked hopefully. "A simple dress, maybe? Mine is rather beyond saving, I'm afraid." Martha looked her over with a practiced eye. "I've got a few things that might fit. My daughter left some clothes behind when she married and moved to Cheyenne. I'll bring them up with the bathwater. Won't be fancy, but they'll be clean and whole." "That would be wonderful, thank you." After Martha left, Clara and Luke stood awkwardly in the hallway, suddenly uncertain. For 2 days they'd been constantly together, pressed close on horseback, bound by necessity and danger. Now, with separate rooms and a few hours of safety, the intimacy felt different, more charged, more complicated. "You should rest," Luke said, his voice gruff. "Soak in that bath, eat something, then sleep. You've earned it." "What about you?" Clara asked. "Will you rest too? Or will you spend all night planning how to get yourself killed?" Luke's jaw tightened. "I'll rest. But come midnight, I'm riding out to Copper Canyon. I need to scout the camp, see what I'm dealing with. Maybe I'll get lucky and catch Barton alone." "And if you don't get lucky? If they catch you instead? Then I suppose I'll find out if there's anything waiting for me on the other side." Luke's attempt at a smile was ghastly. "Don't worry about me, Clara. I've been taking care of myself for a long time." "That's exactly what worries me." Clara reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the faint tremor of exhaustion. "You've been taking care of yourself for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to let someone else care about what happens to you." Luke stared down at their joined hands. "Clara, don't get attached. I can't be what you need. I'm too broken, too far gone. All I have left in me is this one thing, this one purpose. Once it's done, I don't even know if there'll be anything left." "There will be," Clara said fiercely. "You're more than just revenge, Luke Granger, whether you believe it or not. And yes, maybe I am getting attached. Maybe that's foolish of me. But I've spent my whole life being careful, being proper, doing what was expected. And where did it get me? Nearly married off to a man who collected wives like trophies. So forgive me if I've decided that life's too short to pretend I don't care about things that matter." Luke's eyes met hers, and for a moment Clara saw past all his carefully constructed walls to the raw need underneath. The longing for connection, for someone to see him as more than just a weapon of vengeance, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, he could be human again. Then he pulled his hand away, stepping back. "Get some rest, Clara." We'll talk in the morning." He disappeared into his room before she could respond, the door closing with quiet finality. Clara stood in the hallway for a long moment, fighting the urge to knock, to push, to make him acknowledge what was building between them. But she'd said her piece. The rest was up to him. She went into her own room and locked the door, leaning against it with her eyes closed. Every part of her body ached, but it was the emotional exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. 2 days ago, she'd been a different person, still scared, still running, but fundamentally alone. Now she'd entangled her fate with a man bent on self-destruction, a man who carried so much pain he could barely stand upright under the weight of it. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young man, Tommy, presumably, carrying 2 large buckets of steaming water. He was maybe 19, with friendly features and a shy smile. "Bathwater, miss," he said. "I'll need to make 2 more trips to fill the tub proper, and Mrs. Henshaw said to give you these." He indicated a bundle of clothing draped over his arm. "Thank you so much." Clara took the clothes and directed Tommy to the washstand, where he poured the water into a large metal tub. True to his word, he made 2 more trips, filling the tub until steam rose in inviting clouds. After he left, Clara stripped off her ruined dress with relief, adding it to the pile of clothes that would likely never be properly clean again. The hot water was absolute heaven. Clara sank into the tub with a groan of pleasure, feeling her abused muscles begin to unknot. She scrubbed herself thoroughly, washing away 2 days of dust and sweat and fear, watching the water turn progressively dirtier. When she was finally clean, she washed her hair, working her fingers through the tangles until it hung smooth and wet down her back. She'd just finished drying off and examining Martha's daughter's clothes, a simple blue cotton dress that looked like it would fit reasonably well, plus undergarments and even a nightgown, when another knock came. This time, it was Martha herself, carrying a tray laden with food. "Thought you might prefer some privacy while you ate," Martha said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "There's stew, cornbread, butter, and coffee. Not fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." "It looks wonderful," Clara said sincerely. The rich smell of beef stew was making her mouth water. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. Martha hesitated, then said carefully, "Miss Whitmore, I don't mean to pry, but are you all right? You and Mr. Granger, you've clearly been through something difficult. If you need help, if you need anything at all, you just say the word." The kindness in the older woman's voice nearly undid Clara. "I'm all right," she managed. "Or I will be, once I've had a chance to recover. Mr. Granger saved my life. He's a good man." "I'm sure he is." Martha's expression was knowing. "Though from the way you two were looking at each other downstairs, I'd say there's more to it than just rescue and gratitude." Clara felt her cheeks heat. "It's complicated." "The best things usually are." Martha patted her shoulder. "Get some food in you, then get some sleep. Things always look better in the morning." After Martha left, Clara devoured the stew and cornbread, barely pausing to chew. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. When she'd eaten her fill, and it took quite a lot to satisfy the hollow ache in her stomach, she changed into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy and the pillow thin, but after 2 nights on the hard ground, it felt like luxury. Clara pulled the quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes, certain she'd fall asleep immediately. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man in the next room. Was he sleeping? Or was he sitting by his window, watching the street, counting down the hours until midnight when he planned to ride out to almost certain death? She must have eventually dozed off, because she was startled awake by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Clara sat up, heart pounding, and checked the small clock on the nightstand. Just past midnight. She scrambled out of bed and pressed her ear to the door, listening. The footsteps were definitely Luke's, moving quietly toward the stairs. Without stopping to think about the wisdom of it, Clara grabbed Martha's daughter's dress and pulled it on over her nightgown, not bothering with all the buttons. She slipped out into the hallway just in time to see Luke reaching the top of the stairs. "Luke!" she whispered urgently. "Wait." He turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and frustration. In the dim lamplight, she could see he'd changed into dark clothes, had his gun belt strapped on, carried his rifle in one hand. A man dressed for war. "Go back to bed, Clara." "Not until you listen to me." She hurried down the hallway toward him, very aware that she was improperly dressed, and her hair was falling loose around her shoulders. But modesty seemed less important than keeping Luke from doing something stupid. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." Luke glanced down the stairs, clearly warring with himself. Then he sighed and gestured to his room. 5 minutes. That's all I can spare if I want to be in position before dawn. They went into his room, and Luke closed the door quietly behind them. The space was identical to Clara's, but it bore the signs of his presence. His saddlebags on the chair, his coat draped over the bedpost, the unmistakable scent of leather and gunpowder, and something uniquely him. "What do you want me to say, Clara?" Luke asked wearily. "That I'll stay here, let Barton slip away again? I can't do that. I won't." "I want you to think about what you're doing," Clara said. "Really think about it, not just react out of grief and rage. You're planning to ride out alone to a camp full of outlaws in the middle of the night. Even if you manage to kill Barton, even if by some miracle you survive, what then? You'll be a wanted man yourself. Vigilante justice is still murder in the eyes of the law." "I don't care about the law, not anymore." "Yes, you do. You were a marshal, Luke. You dedicated years of your life to upholding justice. Don't throw all of that away because you're too hurt to see any other path forward." Luke's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You want to know what I see when I close my eyes? I see Sarah's face. I see Emma's little hand still holding her doll. I see the blood, Clara, so much blood. And I see Barton laughing because he knows he got away with it. He knows that somewhere out there is a broken man who couldn't protect his own family, and that thought probably makes him laugh every single day. So don't tell me about other paths. This is the only path I have." "No," Clara said firmly. She crossed the room and grabbed his arms, forcing him to look at her. "This is the path you've chosen because it's easier than the alternative. It's easier to hunt and kill and throw yourself into death than it is to actually live with your grief, to work through it, to find a way to honor Sarah and Emma's memory that doesn't involve destroying yourself." "You think this is easy?" Luke's voice was raw, broken. "You think any of this is easy?" "I think it's easier than letting yourself heal," Clara said. "I think it's easier than admitting that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to survive. That maybe your wife and daughter would want you to have a life beyond vengeance." "They're dead because of me!" The words exploded out of Luke like a dam breaking. "They died because I put on that badge, because I made enemies, because I was too arrogant to think anyone would target my family. Sarah begged me to quit, to find something safer, and I told her I was doing important work, that I was making a difference. And then she died screaming my name, wondering where I was, why I wasn't there to protect her. Emma died calling for her daddy, and I wasn't there. I failed them in the worst way possible, so don't you dare stand there and tell me I deserve to survive when they didn't." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, her heart breaking for this man's pain. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "Luke, it wasn't your fault. You didn't kill them. Barton did. And destroying yourself won't bring them back." "I know that," Luke's voice cracked. "God, Clara, I know that. But I don't know what else to do. This is all I have left. If I'm not hunting Barton, if I'm not working toward this one goal, then what am I? Just a shell of a man, empty and useless and alone." "You're Luke Granger," Clara said fiercely. "You're brave and strong and capable of extraordinary kindness. You're a man who saved my life without asking for anything in return, a man who still remembers how to be gentle despite everything you've been through. You're someone worth saving, Luke, and if you can't see that, then I'll see it for both of us until you can." Luke stared at her, his chest heaving, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why do you care? You barely know me." "Because I see you," Clara said simply. "Not the ghost you think you are. Not the instrument of revenge you've tried to become. I see the man underneath, the one who's still fighting to exist despite all the pain. And that man deserves a chance at something more than death." For a long moment they stood there in the lamplight, close enough that Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. Then Luke reached up slowly, almost tentatively, and cupped her face in his rough palm. "You're dangerous," he whispered. "You make me want things I have no right to want anymore." "Like what?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "Like tomorrow. like hope, like... He trailed off, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Like this. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost questioning, as if he wasn't sure he remembered how. Clara responded without hesitation, rising on her toes, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, became urgent, desperate, two people seeking connection in the midst of overwhelming darkness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. Clara, A gunshot split the night air outside, followed by shouting and the thunder of hoofbeats. Luke's entire body went rigid. He pulled away from Clara and moved to the window, peering out carefully. "What is it?" Clara asked, her heart racing. "Barton's men. In the street." Luke's voice was grim. "They're shooting up the saloon, terrorizing the town. This is my fault. They're making a statement, showing everyone that they can do whatever they want." More gunshots rang out, punctuated by breaking glass and drunken laughter. Clara joined Luke at the window and saw chaos unfolding below. 5 or 6 men on horseback were riding up and down the street, firing their guns into the air, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. Townspeople were fleeing, shuttering windows, hiding. "I have to stop this," Luke said, already moving toward the door. "Luke, wait!" But he was gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Clara watched from the window as he emerged onto the street below, rifle in hand, walking with calm purpose toward the chaos. "That's far enough." Luke's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Ride on out of here before someone gets hurt." The outlaws wheeled their horses around, facing him. Even from her window, Clara could see the sneers on their faces, the casual cruelty of men who'd never faced real consequences. "Well, well," one of them called out, "if it ain't the man who killed Danny. Boys, I think we just found ourselves some entertainment." Clara's breath caught in her throat as the men started to spread out, circling Luke like wolves. He stood his ground, rifle ready, and she realized with dawning horror that he'd just walked into exactly the kind of confrontation he'd been planning. Except now it was in the middle of town, with innocent people watching from windows, exactly what he'd promised Sheriff Cole he wouldn't do. And Clara knew, with sick certainty, that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just Luke's fate, but the fate of everyone in Silver Creek. The storm they'd been riding ahead of had finally caught up with them, and there was no more running. Clara's hands gripped the windowsill so tightly her knuckles went white as she watched the scene unfold below. Luke stood in the center of the street, a solitary figure facing down 6 mounted outlaws who circled him like buzzards around a dying animal. The lamplight from the saloon cast long, dancing shadows across the dusty ground, and somewhere in the distance a dog was barking frantically as if sensing the violence about to erupt. "You boys have 3 seconds to turn those horses around," Luke called out, his voice steady as stone. "After that, I start shooting, and I don't miss." The outlaw who'd spoken before, a thick-shouldered man with a cruel mouth, laughed. "You hear that, boys? One man with a rifle thinks he can take all 6 of us. That's either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've heard all week." "I'm betting on stupid," another man chimed in, younger, with wild eyes that suggested too much whiskey and not enough sense. "Especially since we know exactly who you are, Granger. Word travels fast. You're the one who's been hunting our boys, the one who killed Danny this afternoon." "Danny drew first," Luke replied calmly. "He made his choice. Now you boys are making yours. Choose wisely." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. She had to do something, had to help somehow. But what could she possibly do? She had no weapons, no training, nothing but the desperate need to keep Luke alive. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the water pitcher by the washstand, the lamp on the table. Pathetic, useless things that couldn't stop bullets. Down on the street, the thick-shouldered man was still talking, clearly enjoying himself. "Here's the thing, Granger. Our boss, Mr. Barton, he's real interested in meeting you. Seems you've made quite an impression, what with hunting his men and all. So we're going to take you to him, let him decide what to do with you. You can come peaceful, or we can drag you there bleeding, your choice." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Luke said, "but I'll give you boys a message for Barton. Tell him Luke Granger says it's time we finished what he started in Denver. Tell him I'm coming for him, and this time there won't be any escape. He's going to pay for what he did to my family." The mention of Denver seemed to strike a nerve. The thick-shouldered man's smile faded, replaced by something harder, meaner. So that's what this is about. You're the marshal whose wife and kid got themselves killed. Barton told us about you, said you'd been following him like a lost puppy, always a day late and $1 short. Luke's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. Last warning. Take him, the thick-shouldered man shouted. Everything happened at once. The outlaws spurred their horses forward, guns coming up. Luke dropped to one knee and fired in one smooth motion, the rifle crack splitting the night. The thick-shouldered man jerked backward with a scream, tumbling from his saddle. Luke worked the lever, fired again, and another outlaw fell, clutching his leg. The remaining 4 scattered, seeking cover, returning fire. Bullets whined through the air, one shattering the window of the general store, another kicking up dust near Luke's feet. He dove behind a water trough, taking cover, continuing to fire with methodical precision. Clara couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed the lamp from the table and ran out of the room, taking the stairs so fast she nearly fell. Martha was in the lobby, her face pale with fear, peering out through a crack in the door. "Miss Whitmore, get back upstairs," Martha cried. "It's not safe." "I know," Clara said, pushing past her toward the door. "That's why I have to help." She burst out onto the street, staying close to the building fronts, the lamp clutched in her hands. The shooting had momentarily paused, both sides reassessing. Clara could see Luke behind the water trough, reloading his rifle, blood seeping from a graze on his shoulder. The outlaws had taken cover behind various obstacles, one near the saloon steps, 2 behind a wagon, one in the alley beside the general store. "Clara, get back inside," Luke shouted when he saw her, his face contorted with fury and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" "Saving your life, you stubborn fool," Clara yelled back. Then, before she could lose her nerve, she ran toward the alley where one of the outlaws was hiding. She could see him there in the shadows, his attention fixed on Luke, his gun raised and ready to fire. Clara threw the lamp with all her strength. It struck the wall beside the outlaw's head and exploded, oil spraying everywhere, flames erupting instantly. The man screamed and staggered backward, his sleeve catching fire, his gun clattering to the ground as he frantically tried to beat out the flames. "Behind you!" Clara screamed at Luke, pointing toward the saloon where another outlaw was taking aim. Luke spun and fired without hesitation. The outlaw dropped, his gun firing harmlessly into the air. That left 2 men still standing, and they seemed to finally realize they were losing this fight badly. They broke cover and ran for their horses, mounting up and spurring away into the darkness, not bothering to collect their fallen comrades. For a moment, everything was silent except for the crackle of flames in the alley and the moaning of the wounded outlaws. Then Sheriff Cole came running up the street, his young deputy Tommy close behind, both carrying shotguns. "Jesus Christ, Granger!" Cole shouted. "What the hell happened here?" "Your town had a problem," Luke said, emerging from behind the water trough, still covering the wounded men with his rifle. "I solved it." Clara ran to him, her hands reaching for his bloodied shoulder. "You're hurt." "It's nothing, just a graze." Luke caught her hands, his eyes blazing. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed. I told you to stay in the hotel. And I told you I wasn't going to let you die," Clara shot back, her voice shaking with adrenaline and fear and fury. "You were outnumbered. They were going to kill you. Someone had to do something." "So you threw a lamp at an armed outlaw?" Luke's voice rose. "That's your idea of helping?" "It worked, didn't it?" Before Luke could respond, Cole stepped between them. "You two can argue later. Right now, we've got wounded prisoners to deal with and a fire to put out." He gestured to Tommy. "Get some men together. We need water for that fire, and we need to get these outlaws to the jail before they bleed out." More townspeople were emerging now, drawn by the gunfire and the flames. Clara recognized Martha among them, and several men who quickly organized to fight the fire before it could spread. Within minutes, a bucket brigade had formed, water splashing from hand to hand, slowly bringing the blaze under control. Luke and Clara stood aside as Cole and his deputy began collecting the fallen outlaws. 2 were dead, the thick-shouldered man and the one Luke had shot near the saloon. 3 were wounded but alive, including the one Clara had hit with the lamp, who had burns on his arm and face but would survive. They were rounded up and marched off toward the jail, leaving bloody tracks in the dust. "This changes everything," Luke said quietly, his eyes on the departing prisoners. "Barton knows now where I am. He'll come with everything he's got." "Good," Clara said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. "Let him come. We'll be ready." Luke looked at her sharply. "We?" "Clara, there is no we in this. You're not—" "I'm not what? Involved?" "In case you've forgotten, those men attacked my wagon first. They killed my driver. They've been hunting me too. This became my fight the moment they pulled their guns on me." Clara grabbed Luke's arm, forcing him to face her fully. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting, Luke. I left everything I knew to come out here and build a new life. I've been shot at, chased across 30 miles of prairie, and now I've set a man on fire to save your life. So don't you dare try to shut me out of this." A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips despite everything. "You really are dangerous. You know that? I learned from the best." Sheriff Cole returned, his expression grim. "I've got 3 prisoners in my jail, all singing like canaries now that they realize how much trouble they're in. They confirmed what I suspected. Barton's got about a dozen men at Copper Canyon, and they were planning to hit the town tomorrow night. Rob the bank, shake down the businesses, probably burn a few buildings to make a point. This little raid tonight was supposed to soften us up, show us they could do whatever they wanted. But now they know we'll fight back," Luke said. "That might make them more cautious. Or it might make them come at us with everything they've got." Cole ran a hand through his graying hair. "Mr. Granger, I need your help. I know you're not a lawman anymore, but you've got more experience dealing with men like this than I do. My deputy's a good kid, but he's never been in a real fight. The town's got maybe a dozen men who can handle a gun, but most of them are ranchers and store clerks, not fighters. If Barton comes tomorrow with all his men, we're going to need every advantage we can get." Luke was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. Clara could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to ride out alone and face Barton man to man, versus the part that recognized these people needed help. That revenge wasn't worth letting innocent folks die. "All right," Luke finally said. "We'll make a stand here. Fortify the town, set up defensive positions, turn this into a killing ground if they want to come at us. But Sheriff, you need to understand something. When this is over, when Barton's dealt with, I'm taking him. Not for trial, not for jail. For what he did to my family." Cole's expression was conflicted, but he nodded. "I can't officially condone that, Mr. Granger. But unofficially, I won't stand in your way. That man's got too much blood on his hands to quibble about legal niceties." He extended his hand. "We've got a deal." They shook on it, and Clara felt something shift in the air. This was no longer just Luke's vendetta. It had become a community fighting for survival. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a strange sense of purpose settling over her shoulders. This was why she'd come west, not just to teach children, but to be part of something real, something that mattered. The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. Luke took charge with the easy authority of a man who'd led men before, organizing the town's defenses with military precision. Barricades were erected at both ends of the main street using wagons, barrels, and anything else that could stop a bullet. The most defensible buildings, the sheriff's office, the hotel, and the church, were designated as strongholds where women and children could shelter if the fighting started. Clara found herself working alongside Martha and several other women, preparing medical supplies, organizing food and water, making sure everyone knew where to go if trouble came. No one questioned her presence or her authority. Out here, when death was coming, credentials and propriety didn't matter. What mattered was whether you could be counted on to do what needed doing. Dawn was breaking, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, when Josiah Mercer finally appeared. He was a portly man in his 50s, with a round face and shrewd eyes, dressed in a suit that had probably been expensive once but was now worn at the elbows. He found Clara and Luke standing near one of the barricades discussing firing angles. "Miss Whitmore, I presume?" Mercer said, slightly out of breath. "I'm Josiah Mercer. We've been corresponding about your teaching position. Though I must say this isn't quite the welcome I'd planned for you." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Mr. Mercer, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, even under these circumstances." "Likewise, my dear, likewise." Mercer's expression turned serious as he looked at Luke. "And you must be the famous Luke Granger. Sheriff Cole told me what happened last night, told me what you're planning to do for us. The whole town's grateful. Save your gratitude until after we survive, Luke said bluntly. Mr. Mercer, how many men can you give me? Men who can shoot and won't run when things get hot. Mercer considered. 15, maybe 20 if we stretch it. Most are ranchers, used to handling rifles for predators and rustlers. A few are former soldiers. We've got one man who fought in the war, knows his way around tactics. They're not professional gunfighters, but they'll stand their ground. That'll have to do. Luke pointed to various positions around the town. I want riflemen on every roof that has a clear line of sight to the street, the rest positioned behind the barricades. We create a crossfire zone that anything coming down that street will have to pass through. Make them pay for every inch they advance. And what about Barton himself? Mercer asked. Where will he be? Leading from the rear, most likely. He's a coward at heart, always sends his men to do the dirty work while he hangs back. Luke's expression was hard. But once the shooting starts, once his men start falling, he'll show himself. Rage and pride will bring him out. That's when I'll have him. Clara listened to them discuss strategy, her mind spinning with the reality of what was coming. Tomorrow night, this peaceful street would become a battlefield. People would die. Maybe people she'd come to know in the past few hours. Martha with her kind eyes, Tommy the shy deputy, Sheriff Cole who was doing his best to protect a town with too few resources. Maybe even Luke charging into danger with the recklessness of someone who'd already made peace with death. The thought made her chest tighten with fear. Clara? Luke's voice pulled her from her dark thoughts. You all right? No, she said honestly. I'm terrified. But I'm here, and I'll do whatever needs doing. Luke's expression softened. I'm going to ask Martha to set you up in the church with the other women. When the fighting starts, I'll be right here, Clara interrupted. I can reload weapons, I can tend the wounded, I can watch your back. You need every able body you've got, Luke. You can't afford to bench people just because they're women. She's right, Martha said, appearing beside them with a rifle in her hands that she held with surprising competence. My late husband taught me to shoot when we first came out here. I'm not sitting in a church saying prayers while my town burns. Half the women here feel the same way. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Mercer cut in. Mr. Granger, this is the West. Out here, women shoot alongside men when survival's on the line. You'd be foolish to turn down help, regardless of where it comes from. Fine, Luke said, though he didn't look happy about it. But Clara, you stay near me. If things go bad, if we start losing, I need you to run. Promise me that. But I promise, Clara lied, knowing she'd do no such thing. She wasn't leaving Luke to die. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after that kiss, brief and desperate as it had been. Not when she was just beginning to realize how much he'd come to mean to her. The day passed in tense preparation. Men drilled on the barricades, practicing shooting positions and reload procedures. Women organized supplies and created an impromptu hospital in the hotel lobby, with Martha taking charge and showing surprising knowledge of treating wounds. Sheriff Cole sent riders to the neighboring ranches, calling for any men who could be spared to help defend the town. By mid-afternoon, they had 32 defenders in total. Not nearly enough if Barton came with his full force, but better than nothing. Luke positioned them carefully, using every trick he'd learned in his years as a lawman. The town, he explained to Clara, was now a trap waiting to be sprung. The key is making them think they can win, he said, showing her the setup. We leave the southern barricade lighter, make it look weak. They'll focus their attack there, thinking they can break through. But once they commit, we hit them from the roofs and from the northern barricade, catch them in a crossfire with nowhere to run. And if they don't fall for it, then we improvise. Luke's smile was grim. I've learned that no plan survives contact with the enemy. You prepare as best you can, then you adapt. As sunset approached, a rider appeared on the southern horizon, a single man on a gray horse carrying a white flag. Luke and Sheriff Cole met him at the southern barricade, rifles ready despite the flag of truce. The rider was young, probably not even 20, with nervous eyes and shaking hands. I've got a message from Mr. Barton, he said, his voice cracking slightly. He says you've got one of his wounded men in your jail, and he wants him back. He's willing to trade for him. Trade what? Cole demanded. Your lives. The young man swallowed hard. Mr. Barton says if you release his man and that woman who was in the wagon, the one you're hiding, he'll leave the town in peace. You've got until midnight to decide. After that, he's coming with everything he's got, and he won't leave a building standing. Luke's hand clenched on his rifle. You go back and tell Barton that he's not getting the woman, he's not getting his man, and if he wants a fight, we'll give him one he won't forget. Tell him Luke Granger says it's time we ended this. Him and me, face to face. Or is he too much of a coward to face the husband of the woman he murdered? The young rider's eyes went wide. You're Granger? The marshal from Denver? Former marshal, Luke corrected. Now I'm just a man with a debt to collect. You make sure Barton gets that message, boy. Every word. The rider nodded frantically and wheeled his horse around, galloping back the way he'd come. Clara, watching from behind the barricade, saw the fear in the young man's face and wondered how many of Barton's men were there out of loyalty versus terror. How many would run if given the chance? Well, Cole said heavily, I guess we've got our answer. They're coming tonight. The next few hours were the longest of Clara's life. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, the townspeople took their positions and waited. Clara found herself on the roof of the hotel with Luke and 3 other men, lying flat on her stomach behind a low parapet, a loaded rifle beside her that Martha had pressed into her hands with quick instructions on how to use it. You squeeze the trigger, don't pull, Martha had said, and aim for the center of the chest, biggest target. Now Clara lay in the darkness, her heart pounding, the rifle cold and heavy in her hands. Luke was beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. Around them, the town was silent, waiting, every defender at their post. Are you scared? Clara whispered. Terrified, Luke admitted. Anyone who says they're not scared before a fight is either lying or stupid. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. What if we lose? What if there's too many of them? Luke turned his head to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were soft. Then we lose knowing we stood up and fought, that we didn't let evil win without a battle. But Clara, if things go bad, if I tell you to run, you do it. You find a horse, and you ride as far and as fast as you can. Find another town, start over, live the life you came out here to live. And leave you? Clara shook her head. I can't do that, Luke, I won't. You have to, because if you die here tonight, because of me, because of my vendetta, I'll never forgive myself. You understand? You're my... He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. You're my reason to remember that there's more to life than revenge. You make me want to survive this, so promise me you'll run if you have to. Clara reached out and took his hand, squeezing tight. I promise I'll try to survive. That's the best I can do. It would have to be enough, because at that moment, one of the sentries on the ground gave a low whistle, the signal they'd agreed on. Riders approaching from the south, a lot of them, from the sound of it. Luke raised his head carefully, peering over the parapet. Clara did the same, her breath catching in her throat at what she saw. They were coming down the street in a loose formation, 20 riders, all heavily armed, moving with the confidence of men who'd never lost a fight. In the center, on a magnificent black horse, rode a man with red hair that gleamed like blood in the moonlight. Rance Barton. Even from a distance, Clara could feel the malevolence rolling off him, the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. Hold your fire, Luke whispered, his voice carrying just loud enough for the other defenders on the roof to hear. Let them get into the kill zone. Wait for my signal. The riders came closer, moving slowly now, wary of ambush. Barton raised his hand, bringing them to a halt about 50 yards from the southern barricade. He looked around at the dark buildings, the seemingly empty street, and laughed. Well now, Barton called out, his voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly. Looks like the brave defenders of Silver Creek decided to hide like the cowards they are. That's fine. Makes burning the town easier when no one's shooting back. We're not hiding, Barton, Luke called down from the roof. We're just waiting for you to make your last mistake. Barton's head snapped up, searching for the source of the voice. When he spotted Luke on the roof, his smile widened. Luke Granger, I was hoping you'd be here. Saves me the trouble of tracking you down. You've been quite the nuisance these past few months. Good, Luke said. I'd hate to think I wasn't making an impression. How's that for a message? 3 of your men dead, 3 more in jail, and we haven't even started the real fight yet. Oh, we're starting it now, Barton promised. And when it's done, I'm going to burn this town to the ground, kill every man who stood against me, and take my sweet time with that pretty schoolteacher you've been protecting, just like I did with your wife. Luke's entire body went rigid beside Clara. She grabbed his arm, feeling the tremor of rage running through him. Don't, she whispered urgently. He's trying to make you lose control. Don't give him what he wants. For a moment, she thought Luke would leap off the roof right then, throw himself at Barton in a suicidal rage. But then he took a deep breath and called back, his voice steady despite the fury underneath. You talk too much, Barton. Always did. Let's see if you fight as well as you run your mouth. Barton's smile vanished. Kill them! Kill them all! The outlaws spurred their horses forward, guns blazing, charging toward the southern barricade just as Luke had predicted. They made it perhaps 20 feet before Luke gave the signal. Now! The night exploded into gunfire. Rifles erupted from every rooftop, every window, every defensive position that Luke had so carefully arranged. The crossfire caught Barton's men in a withering storm of lead that turned the street into a slaughter ground. Horses screamed and reared, throwing riders. Men tumbled from saddles, some dead before they hit the ground, others crawling desperately for cover that didn't exist. Clara forced herself to raise her rifle, to sight down the barrel at a man who was aiming at the defenders below. Her hands shook violently, her finger frozen on the trigger. This was different from throwing a lamp in the heat of the moment. This was deliberate, calculated killing, and her entire body rebelled against it. Breathe, Luke said beside her, still firing with mechanical precision. You don't have to shoot, Clara. Just stay down. But one of the outlaws had spotted their position. He wheeled his horse around and fired upward, the bullet striking the parapet inches from Clara's head, showering her with splinters. Instinct took over. She squeezed the trigger, the rifle kicking hard against her shoulder, and watched in horror as the man jerked backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. He fell from his horse and didn't move again. Clara's stomach lurched. She'd just killed a man, actually taken a human life. The rifle slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering on the roof. Clara! Luke grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him instead of at the body in the street. Hey, look at me. Look at me. You did what you had to do. He would have killed you, killed all of us. You understand? This isn't murder. This is survival. Clara nodded mutely, but she couldn't stop shaking. Luke pulled her against his chest, shielding her with his own body as he continued to fire one-handed. The battle raged around them. The night turned into chaos of gunfire and screaming and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Below, the outlaws who'd survived the initial ambush were breaking apart, some trying to flee, others taking cover behind dead horses and returning fire. But the defenders had the advantage of position and preparation. Slowly, methodically, they picked off Barton's men one by one. Through the smoke and confusion, Clara saw Barton himself, still mounted on his black horse, screaming orders that no one could hear over the gunfire. He looked furious, disbelieving, as if it had never occurred to him that a small town could fight back this effectively, that his reign of terror could actually end. There, Luke pointed. He's trying to retreat. I'm not letting him get away again. Before Clara could stop him, Luke was moving, running in a crouch toward the ladder that led down from the roof. Stay here, he shouted back at her. Stay down and stay safe. But Clara couldn't let him go alone. Not after everything. She grabbed the rifle with trembling hands and followed, nearly falling off the ladder in her haste. By the time she reached the ground, Luke was already running toward the southern barricade, rifle forgotten, his pistol drawn. His entire focus was on Barton, who'd finally seen him coming and was hauling his horse around to face this new threat. Granger! Barton's voice carried over the diminishing gunfire. You want me? Come and get me! They faced each other in the middle of the street. 2 men separated by 30 feet and 3 years of grief and rage. Around them the battle was winding down. Most of Barton's men were dead or wounded, the survivors throwing down their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. But none of that mattered anymore. This had always been about Luke and Barton. Everything else was just prelude. You killed my wife, Luke said, his voice deadly calm. You killed my 8-year-old daughter. You looked them in the eyes and pulled the trigger, and you've been laughing about it ever since. Barton smiled, actually smiled. I'll admit I enjoyed it. Your wife begged real pretty, said she'd do anything if I'd just spare the little girl. But where's the fun in mercy? Besides, I needed you to suffer. Needed you to know what it felt like to lose everything. You took a year of my life when you put me in prison, Granger. I took everything you loved in return. Seems fair to me. Luke's hand tightened on his pistol, but he didn't draw. Not yet. You're a coward and a monster. You hide behind your men, let them do your dirty work while you count your money and plan your next atrocity. But there's no one to hide behind anymore, Barton. Just you and me. Draw. With pleasure, Barton said, and his hand dropped to his gun. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Clara saw Barton's fingers close around his pistol grip, saw him start to draw, saw Luke's hand move with the speed of long practice, his gun clearing leather with the smooth certainty of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously, echoing off the buildings. Luke staggered, his left side blooming red. Barton made a choking sound and looked down at the hole in his chest, surprise written across his face. His gun fell from his fingers. He swayed in the saddle, tried to say something, then toppled sideways and hit the ground with a heavy thud. "Luke!" Clara screamed, running toward him. He was still on his feet somehow, his gun still raised, making sure Barton was really down. Only when he saw the outlaw leader lying motionless in the dirt did Luke lower his weapon. "It's done," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's finally done." Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed. Clara caught him before he hit the ground, or tried to. He was too heavy, and they both went down hard. She cradled his head in her lap, her hands pressing frantically against the wound in his side, trying to stop the bleeding that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "No, no, no," she chanted, tears streaming down her face. "You don't get to die now. Not after everything. Luke, stay with me. Please stay with me." His eyes found hers, and even through the pain she could see something that looked almost like peace. "Did I get him? Is Barton dead?" "Yes," Clara sobbed. "He's dead. You got him. Now stop talking and save your strength. Martha, we need help over here." People were running toward them now. Sheriff Cole, Martha with her medical supplies, Tommy, and several other townsmen. They formed a circle around Luke and Clara, and Martha dropped to her knees beside them, her experienced hands already assessing the damage. "The bullet went through," Martha said after a moment, her voice professionally calm. "That's good. Means we don't have to dig it out. But he's losing a lot of blood. We need to get him inside, get him patched up proper. You men, get him to the hotel. Gently now." They lifted Luke as carefully as they could, but he still groaned with pain. Clara stayed right beside him, clutching his hand, refusing to let go even when Martha tried to shoo her away. They carried him into the hotel and laid him on a table that had been prepared for just this purpose, white sheets already stained with blood from earlier wounded. "Miss Whitmore," Martha said firmly, "I need you to step back now. Let me work." "I'm not leaving him," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Please, I can help. Just tell me what to do." Martha looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. We don't have time for squeamishness. Understood?" "Understood." The next hour was the longest of Clara's life. She followed Martha's instructions without question, holding Luke down when the pain made him thrash, handing over instruments and bandages, watching as the older woman cleaned the wound and stitched it closed with steady, practiced hands. Luke drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out, sometimes going frighteningly still. "Talk to him," Martha instructed. "Keep him anchored. Don't let him slip away." So Clara talked. She told Luke about her childhood in Boston, about the brother who'd helped her escape, about her dreams for the schoolhouse in Silver Creek. She told him about the first time she'd seen him on that prairie, how she'd thought he looked like some avenging angel come to save her. She told him things she'd never told anyone, secrets and hopes and fears, anything to keep the sound of her voice in his ears, to give him something to hold on to. "Don't you leave me," she whispered fiercely when Martha finally stepped back, her work complete. "Don't you dare leave me, Luke Granger. We have too much left to do. You promised you'd remember how to live again. You promised." Luke's eyes fluttered open, finding her face. "Did I?" he murmured. "Must have been delirious." Clara laughed through her tears. "You're going to be fine. Martha says you're too stubborn to die." Damn right I am, Martha confirmed, wiping blood from her hands. The wound's clean, the bleeding stopped, and barring infection, he should make a full recovery. But he needs rest, lots of it. No heroics, no riding off into the sunset. Just bed rest and recuperation. I'll make sure of it, Clara promised. Over the next few days, the town of Silver Creek slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after a battle that had left 8 outlaws dead and another 6 in custody awaiting the territorial marshal. The prisoners sang like birds, desperate to save their own necks, and their testimonies painted a picture of Barton's crimes that stretched back years and across 3 territories. The marshal, when he finally arrived, said it was the biggest outlaw roundup he'd seen in a decade. Luke spent those days recovering in a room at the hotel, with Clara rarely leaving his side. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, read to him from the books she'd managed to salvage from her wagon. They talked for hours, sharing stories, learning each other, building something that felt fragile and precious and impossibly new. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Cole came to visit, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mr. Granger," he said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. The whole town does. You saved a lot of lives, and you rid the territory of a genuine monster. The territorial marshal says there's a reward for Barton, $5,000. That's yours, of course." Luke shook his head. "Split it among the defenders, the men who stood with us. They earned it more than I did." "That's generous of you, but I didn't do this for money, Sheriff. I did it because it needed doing, because Barton needed to pay for what he'd done. The money doesn't matter." Luke glanced at Clara, who was sitting in the chair beside his bed, her hand in his. "Besides, I'm thinking I might stay in Silver Creek for a while. See what happens." Cole's face broke into a wide smile. "Well now, that would be something. Tell you the truth, I've been thinking about retiring. My joints aren't what they used to be, and after that battle, I'm thinking maybe it's time to let a younger man take over. Someone with real experience. Town could use a proper lawman." "Sheriff Cole," Luke said carefully, "are you offering me a job?" "If you're interested. The pay's not much, and the work's mostly boring. Cattle disputes, drunk cowboys, the occasional horse thief. But it's honest work. Legal work. The kind of work a man could be proud of." Cole's expression turned serious. "The kind of work a man could build a life around. Maybe even a family." Clara felt her heart leap at those words, at the implication behind them. Luke looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes, the hope mixed with fear. Was this something he could have? Did he deserve it? "Yes," she said softly, answering the unspoken question. "Yes, you do." Luke's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Then yes, Sheriff. I'm interested. Very interested." Cole left them alone after that, and for a long time Luke and Clara just sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, the future spreading out before them like unmarked territory waiting to be explored. "I should warn you," Luke said finally, "I'm not the man I was before. The grief, the rage, the things I've done, they're part of me now. I can't just forget them or wish them away." "I'm not asking you to," Clara replied. "Sarah and Emma will always be part of you. They shaped who you are, and I wouldn't want you to be anyone else. But Luke, you're also more than your grief. You're kind and brave and capable of extraordinary things. You saved my life. You saved this whole town. That man, the one who could do all that, deserves to live, deserves to be happy." "And you think you could be happy? With a broken-down former marshal who's got more scars than sense?" Clara leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and sweet. "I left everything I knew to come out here and start over, to build something new. I think we could build it together, if you're willing to try." "I'm willing," Luke whispered against her lips. "God help me. I'm willing to try." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Luke recovered slowly but steadily, and as his body healed, Clara watched his spirit begin to mend as well. The haunted look never fully left his eyes. She suspected it never would, but it was joined by other expressions now. Contentment, curiosity, joy. He laughed more, smiled more, let himself exist in moments instead of constantly preparing for the next battle. Clara threw herself into her new role as Silver Creek schoolteacher, and found she loved it more than she'd ever imagined. The children were eager and bright, hungry for knowledge and stories of the wider world. She taught them reading and arithmetic, geography and history, and in return they taught her about life in the West, about survival and resilience and finding beauty in harsh places. Luke officially became sheriff of Silver Creek in a ceremony that was equal parts solemn and celebratory. The whole town turned out to watch Cole pin the badge on Luke's chest and swear him in. Clara stood in the front row, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the past, but choosing to build something new despite it. They courted properly, as was expected, with Luke calling on Clara at the schoolhouse in the evenings, taking her on walks through the prairie in the golden hour before sunset. He told her more stories about Sarah and Emma, and Clara listened without jealousy, understanding that this was part of loving Luke, accepting all of him, including the parts that would always belong to his first family. 3 months after the battle, on a crisp October evening with the first hints of winter in the air, Luke appeared at the schoolhouse carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that he'd clearly picked himself, their stems slightly crushed from his nervous grip. "Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been thinking about what you said that first night, about how you came out here looking for a home, not just a place to live. And I realized something. Home isn't a building or a town or even a plot of land. It's people. It's belonging somewhere, with someone." He dropped to one knee, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I never thought I'd do this again," Luke continued. "Never thought I'd have the right to offer myself to someone, broken as I am. But you've shown me that broken things can still be useful, that scars are just proof you survived. So I'm asking, Clara, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" Tears were streaming down Clara's face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks ached. "Yes," she said, dropping to her knees to meet him. "Yes, absolutely yes. Not because I want you to deserve me, but because we deserve each other. Because we've both fought so hard to get here, and we've earned this happiness." They kissed there on the schoolhouse steps, with the prairie wind singing around them and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. When they finally broke apart, Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "Only piece of jewelry I kept after she passed. I'd like you to have it, if you'll accept it." Clara held out her hand, trembling, and Luke slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, as if everything that had happened, all the pain and fear and struggle, had been leading them to this exact moment. The wedding took place in November, in the little church at the end of Silver Creek's main street. The whole town attended, cramming into the pews, spilling out into the churchyard. Martha stood as Clara's matron of honor, Sheriff Cole, now retired and happier than Clara had ever seen him, gave her away. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers and applause. At the reception in the hotel dining room, with food and music and dancing, Clara found a quiet moment to step outside onto the porch. The night air was cold but not unpleasant, and the stars overhead were magnificent, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston, where city lights drowned out half the sky. Luke joined her a moment later, slipping his arm around her waist. "You all right, Mrs. Granger?" Mrs. Granger. The name sent a little thrill through her. "More than all right. I'm happy. Genuinely, completely happy. I didn't know that was possible anymore." "Neither did I," Luke admitted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I went to their graves last week, Sarah's and Emma's. First time I've been back to Denver since it happened. I needed to tell them about you, needed them to know that I'd found someone who made me want to live again." Clara's throat tightened. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd met someone extraordinary. Someone brave enough to throw lamps at armed outlaws and stubborn enough to love a broken man. That she'd reminded me what it felt like to hope, to dream, to believe in tomorrow." Luke turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face. "That I would always love them, always carry them with me, but that I was choosing to live, to be happy, that I thought they'd approve." "I'm sure they do," Clara whispered. "I'm sure they want nothing but your happiness." "Our happiness," Luke corrected. "This is ours now. You and me. building something new from the ashes, a home, a life, maybe someday a family. The thought of children, of little ones with Luke's gray eyes or Clara's auburn hair, made her smile. Someday, she agreed, when we're ready, when the time is right. They stood together on the porch, watching the stars, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting from inside the hotel. In the distance, a coyote howled, and somewhere closer, a horse nickered softly in the livery stable. The sounds of the West, of their new home, of the life they'd fought so hard to claim. No regrets? Luke asked softly. Clara thought about everything that had brought her here, her father's betrayal, the dangerous journey west, the attack on her wagon, the terror of facing down Barton's gang. She thought about the person she'd been in Boston, trapped and helpless, versus the person she was now, strong and capable and free. Not a single one, she said firmly. Everything I went through, everything we both went through, it brought us to this moment, and this moment is worth it. You're worth it. Luke kissed her then, slow and deep, a promise and a celebration all at once. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I love you, Clara Granger, more than I thought I could love anything again." "I love you too," Clara replied, "and I'm going to spend every day of the rest of our lives reminding you that you deserve this happiness, that you deserve to live." They went back inside together, back to the warmth and light and celebration, back to the community they'd become part of. Martha pulled Clara onto the makeshift dance floor, and Luke found himself surrounded by townsmen eager to clap him on the back and offer congratulations. The party lasted well into the night, with music and laughter echoing through Silver Creek's streets. When it finally ended, when the last guests had stumbled home and the hotel had grown quiet, Luke and Clara climbed the stairs to the room that Martha had specially prepared for them. It was the same room where Luke had recovered from his wound, but it had been transformed with fresh linens and flowers, turned from a sick room into a bridal suite. They stood awkwardly for a moment, suddenly shy with each other despite everything they'd been through. Then Luke laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "This is ridiculous. We've faced down outlaws together, and now we're nervous about being alone." "It's different now," Clara said. "Before we were surviving. Now we're living. It's allowed to feel strange." "Come here," Luke said, opening his arms. Clara stepped into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "We don't have to rush anything. We've got all the time in the world now. No one's chasing us. No battles to fight. Just you and me and whatever comes next." "Whatever comes next," Clara echoed, liking the sound of it. The uncertainty, the possibility, the open road ahead. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, celebrating the simple miracle of being alive and together. Eventually they moved to the bed, not for passion, though that would come in time, but simply to be close, to sleep in each other's arms without fear or urgency or the weight of unfinished business. As Clara drifted off, warm and safe and loved, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the terrified woman who'd fled Boston in the dead of night, who'd watched her wagon explode in gunfire on the Wyoming prairie. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life entirely. The woman she'd become was stronger, braver, more certain of herself. She'd found her purpose teaching children on the frontier. She'd found her courage facing down armed men. And she'd found her home in the arms of a man who'd taught himself to live again. Luke stirred beside her, murmuring something in his sleep. Clara tightened her hold on him, and even in unconsciousness, he relaxed, reassured by her presence. They'd saved each other, she realized. Not in some grand, dramatic gesture, but in 1,000 small moments of choosing to hold on, to believe, to try. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the window to paint the room in shades of gold. Clara woke first and lay quietly, watching Luke sleep, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. The lines of grief and rage had softened, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. When he finally opened his eyes and saw her watching, he smiled, not the grim, hard smile she'd first known, but something warm and genuine and full of promise. "Good morning, Mrs. Granger," he said, his voice sleep-rough and wonderful. "Good morning, Sheriff Granger," she replied, trying out the words, liking how they sounded together. They had breakfast with Martha, who fussed over them like a mother hen, then walked together to the little house at the edge of town that would be their home. It wasn't much, Just 3 rooms and a porch. But it was theirs. A place to build their life, to create new memories, to plant roots in this hard but beautiful land. As they stood on the porch, looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions, Luke took Clara's hand. "Are you ready for this?" "Really ready. It won't always be easy. The winters are harsh, the work is hard, and there's still danger out here. Outlaws, Indians, natural disasters. The West doesn't forgive mistakes." "I know," Clara said. "But I also know that I'd rather face all of that with you than go back to the safe, suffocating life I left behind. I'd rather be scared and free than comfortable and caged." "Then we'll face it together," Luke promised. "Whatever comes, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard, we'll face it side by side." And they did. Over the years that followed, they built a life that was exactly what they'd both been searching for without knowing it. Luke proved to be an excellent sheriff, respected and fair, bringing order to Silver Creek without becoming the kind of lawman who ruled through fear. Clara's school flourished, producing educated children who grew up to become doctors and lawyers, ranchers and teachers, spreading knowledge across the territory. They had their share of challenges, a harsh winter that tested everyone's resolve, a drought that threatened the town's survival, the occasional outlaw passing through looking for easy pickings. But they faced everything together, stronger as a partnership than either had been alone. And in time, the house at the edge of town filled with the sound of children's laughter. First a boy with Luke's gray eyes and serious expression, then twin girls with Clara's auburn hair and quick wit. Each one a blessing, each one proof that life could continue after loss, that joy could grow in soil fertilized by grief. Luke never forgot Sarah and Emma. Clara wouldn't have wanted him to. Their pictures hung in the parlor alongside the new family's photographs. And sometimes on quiet evenings, Luke would tell the children stories about their older sisters in heaven, keeping their memory alive in a way that honored the past without being trapped by it. The teacher who'd come to Silver Creek running from her old life became a pillar of the community, beloved by students and parents alike. The gunslinger who'd nearly destroyed himself in pursuit of revenge became a symbol of justice tempered with mercy, of strength guided by wisdom. Together they proved that broken things could be mended, that second chances were real, that even in the harsh and unforgiving West, love could take root and flourish. Years later, when Clara's hair had gone silver and Luke's movements had slowed with age, they would sit on that same porch and watch the sunset paint the prairie in impossible colors. Their children would visit with grandchildren in tow, and the house would fill with noise and life and the beautiful chaos of family. "Do you ever wonder," Luke asked one evening, his hand still finding Clara's as naturally as breathing, "what would have happened if I hadn't been there that day? If I'd been an hour later, or taken a different path, or decided hunting Barton wasn't worth the risk?" "I try not to," Clara admitted. "It's too frightening to think about all the ways we might have missed each other. All the small moments that had to align perfectly to bring us to this place." "Fate," Luke said softly. "Or maybe just dumb luck. Either way, I'm grateful. For you, for this life, for every day I get to wake up beside you. You saved me, Clara. You gave me a reason to live when I'd forgotten how." "We saved each other," Clara corrected, squeezing his hand. "And we built something beautiful from the wreckage, something worth fighting for." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them that first night on the prairie, when a desperate teacher and a grief-stricken gunslinger had found each other in the darkness. The stars had witnessed their journey from survival to healing to love, and would continue watching long after they were gone, eternal witnesses to a story of redemption and second chances. In Silver Creek, they would tell the story for generations, about the teacher who tamed the gunslinger's heart, about the man who learned to live again, about the battle that saved the town and the love that grew from ashes. The details would blur with time, becoming legend, but the core truth remained unchanged, that sometimes the people we need most find us when we're at our lowest. That grief, while powerful, doesn't have to be permanent. That courage comes in many forms, from facing down armed outlaws to simply choosing to hope when hope seems impossible. And that love, real love, doesn't erase the past but gives us the strength to build a future despite it. As the last light faded from the western sky and the coyotes began their nightly chorus, Luke and Clara Granger sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them to this perfect, imperfect life. They'd both traveled such long, painful roads to get here, but sitting together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the evidence of the life they'd built, the home, the family, the love that had conquered grief, they knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth it. The gunslinger had been tamed not by force, but by compassion. The teacher had found not just a school, but a calling, not just a town, but a home. And together, under the vast Wyoming sky, they'd created something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of hope, a testament to survival. A love story written in dust and blood and unwavering determination, proving that even in the darkest times, when all seems lost, the human heart's capacity for healing and connection can work miracles. Their story ended not with grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but with something infinitely more precious: a quiet evening, a clasped hand, and the simple, profound knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged, together, home, finally, blessedly at peace.